What's going on, everybody? It's GameOnBoxing Reviews here, and welcome back to another LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga news update. So, in today's video, I'm going to be breaking down the new developer diary. So, without further ado, let's get to it. Alright, so first up, here we see a cutscene from Episode 2 featuring Kit Fisto, Mace Windu, and our best look yet at Ki-Adi in Geonosis' Petranaki Arena, where we can also spot two other Jedi in the background, who are both way too blurry to make out, but it's always fun to guess anyway. So I think the Jedi wielding a blue lightsaber could be Barriss Offee, and judging by the brown cape and green lightsaber, the other Jedi might be Saesee Tiin, and these are just my best guesses going off which of the Jedi appeared in this scene in the movie, so it could really be any number of them. Your guess is as good as mine. Next we see two new playable characters, Sy Snootles and Max Rebel, who were part of Max's band in Episode 6, and it'll be interesting to see if they use their musical talent during combat. Now here we see Mace Windu's epic battle against Palpatine in Episode 3, which is actually the scene that I was most hoping to see in the game, so hopefully this cutscene is an indication that players will be able to fight Palpatine as Mace Windu in a boss battle. Next up we see Luke's duel against Kylo Ren on Crait in Episode 8, giving us our best look yet at Luke's force projection, and we recently saw 10 new looks at Luke, but this minifigure wasn't one of them, and it's one of the most detailed variants of Luke that I've seen in the game, so hopefully this version will still be playable. Moving on, we're now going to be breaking down almost every section of Episode 2, starting with the main intro cutscene where we can see the J-type Diplomatic Barge approaching Coruscant, and a shot of Padme's pilot disguise variant with the smoking wreckage of the starship behind her. Next we see Obi-Wan and Anakin chasing Zam Wesell in the XJ6 airspeeder above Coruscant, and judging by the assassination text, I believe this will be the first story mission in this episode. So just to elaborate on that for those that don't know, each episode in this game has 5 story missions, while other scenes in the saga will be experienced in between missions in the open world. Here we see shots of Obi-Wan in Coruscant's Uskru district and inside the Jedi Archives. So after Zam Wesell's airspeeder has crashed, I think the player will have to look for her in the Outlander Club before visiting the Jedi Archives, where they'll try to find out more about Kamino. Next up we see a shot of Obi-Wan inside the Kamino facility with, I think, Lama Su. We can also see the Jango Fett boss fight and the hunt for Jango, with Obi-Wan chasing Fett through space in his Jedi Interceptor, which I think will be the second story mission in this episode, but Jango's boss battle could also be part of that mission. Here we see that Anakin, Padme, and R2-D2 have arrived at Theed's Royal Palace in Naboo, and we'll come back to the shot of Tatooine later because it's a placeholder, but we know that section will be set in Mos Espa, so the two have now left Naboo to begin their search for Anakin's mother, likely starting with a visit to see Watto to find out what he knows. Now, the dev diary didn't include images for the following 2 sections, but I would assume that Anakin will continue searching for his mother in the Tatooine desert, so maybe the player will visit the Lars family at their homestead, which could trigger a conversation cutscene that leads to Anakin attacking a Tusken Raider camp, before he and Padme take off into space and attempt to rescue Obi-Wan from Geonosis. Up next we see shots of Anakin running through Geonosis' Stalgassin hive and a droid factory, but if you look carefully you can also spot a circle highlighting C-3PO, who the player can likely swap to, so I think Geonosis infiltration will be the 3rd story mission in this episode. Now at this point in the movie, Mace Windu has told Yoda that he'll take what Jedi they have left and go to Geonosis to help Obi-Wan, and we could see Mace is running towards a ship in Coruscant's Federal District in this shot, so it appears that the player will actually get to play as Windu after that scene, which could just involve them walking up to the ship and starting the next mission, but that's still an unseen moment in the movie, and who knows, maybe there's more to this section and we'll get to fly the ship to Geonosis. Either way, I just think this is a really cool extension of the story. Lastly, for Episode 2, we see Anakin, Arik, and possibly an Acklay in Geonosis' Petranaki Arena, so I think Geonosian Arena will be the 4th story mission in this episode, and in the final 3 shots we see Obi-Wan running into Dooku's hangar, which leads to Battle of the Jedi, and that has to be Episode 2's last story mission, as we can see Anakin dueling Count Dooku with a green lightsaber, before the story is wrapped up with the main outro cutscene, where we see Anakin and Padme's wedding on Naboo, and we can also see that R2-D2 is the ring bearer. Moving on, we're now going to break down almost every section of Episode 1, starting with the main intro cutscene, which shows Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon asking for permission to board the Trade Federation ship, and we can see from these next two shots that the player actually gets to fly the Republic cruiser and dock inside the ship's hangar, which is just awesome because rather than showing these moments in cutscenes, you're in complete control, so it really looks like you're living out the events of the movie. Now, after negotiations go sideways, we find Obi-Wan in Naboo's swamp, where he meets Jar Jar Binks, who leads the two Jedi to the underwater Gungan city, before they encounter an OPC killer in the Tri-Bubble Bongo, as we can see here, which is confirmed to be the first story mission in this episode. Next, we see that Obi-Wan and Jar Jar have reached the surface and arrived in Theed, so I'd assume that from here, the player will have to rescue Queen Amidala before the crew escapes the planet in the Royal Starship, but as we all know from the movie, the ship is soon attacked by a separatist blockade in space, so I could see that scene being a playable battle in the open world. We also know that the ship sustains damage and needs to land on Tatooine for repairs, which brings us to the placeholder shot that I skipped over earlier, where we can see Qui-Gon on Mos Espa, which confirms that his Poncho variant will be playable. Next up, we see Qui-Gon, R2-D2, Padme, and Jar Jar inside Watto's junk shop, where they'll meet the Toydarian and young Anakin, and from here I think that the player will have to take shelter from the sandstorm in the Skywalker home, which could trigger a cutscene that shows the crew's dinner conversation with Anakin and his mother, where Anakin volunteers to help by racing in the Boonta Eve Classic pod race. Now, after the dinner scene in the movie, Qui-Gon learns of Anakin's Jedi potential through his midichlorian count, and manages to get Watto to agree to set Anakin free if he wins the race. So I'm curious to see if these moments will be cutscenes before the big race, as they do provide essential context for the events that follow in the film. Here we see Anakin's pod racer in Now That's Pod Racing, which I think will be the second story mission in this episode. Afterward, we'll likely get a cutscene where Watto frees Anakin and Qui-Gon uses his winnings to repair the ship, before Anakin says goodbye to his mother in pursuit of becoming a Jedi. And it'll be interesting to see if there's also a Darth Maul boss battle after this mission, but it's a pretty short fight in the movie, so I could just see it being a cutscene. Up next, we see shots of the crew's starship approaching Coruscant, as well as Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Queen Amidala in the Federal District, where we can see two Millennium Falcons behind the team, likely belonging to Player 1 and Player 2, so it seems that you will be able to change your vehicle during exploration of story mode. And from here, I think the player will visit the Jedi Council, which could trigger a cutscene where the Jedi Masters test to see if Anakin is Force sensitive, but as we know from the movie, they decline to train him. Lastly, for episode 1, we can see from the hub outro cutscene that the crew later return to Naboo, where Boss Nass and the Gungans agree to ally with Naboo to fight the Federation, leading to what I think will be the final story missions in this episode. So we have Retake Naboo, which highlights the Darth Maul boss battle with Qui-Gon, then there's the Battle of Naboo, showing Jar Jar rolling on an energy ball, and finally Command Ship, where Anakin's pilot variant destroys the droid control ship in an N1 starfighter, before the story is wrapped up with the main outro cutscene, likely showing Qui-Gon's funeral and Naboo's victory celebration. Moving on to the final episode breakdown, we have episode 4. So, starting with the main intro cutscene, we can see a Star Destroyer pursuing the Tantive 4, as well as a shot of Princess Leia with Captain Antilles in a diplomatic mission, which will likely be the first story mission in this episode. Next, we see Leia giving R2-D2 the plans to the Death Star in the mid-tro cutscene. We can also see that a diplomatic mission continues with R2 before he and C-3PO flee in an escape pod and crash land in the Tatooine desert, where we can spot an unknown prompt sequence for one of the droids to complete. And while this episode's style guide didn't show R2 being captured by Jawas and bought by Owen Lars, I still think we'll see both of those scenes either during gameplay or in a cutscene. Next up, we see Luke and C-3PO in the desert, possibly during their search for R2 after he escapes in the night, which is interesting because the hub mid-tro cutscene shows Luke looking up at the binary sunset, and if you look closely, you can just about see smoke coming from the Lars homestead, which is interesting because in the movie, Luke looks up at the sunset, then looks for R2 the following day, and the burning of the homestead doesn't even happen until Luke leaves Obi-Wan's hut, and at this point he hasn't even met him yet, so it seems that there might be some slight reshuffling in the plot of episode 4. Now, after Luke and C-3PO find R2 in the film, we know they get ambushed by Tusken Raiders, but Obi-Wan scares them away and brings Luke and the two droids back to his hut, where they talk about Anakin and the message from Leia, which we know from the trailers will be a cutscene. Here we see that Obi-Wan and C-3PO have arrived at Mos Eisley, where Han Solo and Chewbacca agree to take the crew to Alderaan, later on, which leads to Hunk of Junk, where we can see Han and the Falcon in what is likely the second story mission in this episode. Up next we see Princess Rescue, featuring Chewie with Han and Luke in their stormtrooper disguises, and I think this will be the third story mission in this episode, but Death Star could be an open world section that leads to some rescue, where we can see Luke's unmasked trooper variant fighting a Dianoga in the trash compactor, likely the fourth story mission in episode 4. It'll also be interesting to see if there's a Darth Vader boss battle at the end of this mission. It's a short scene in the movie, so it could just be a cutscene, but being able to fight Vader as Obi-Wan would be amazing. Lastly, for episode 4, we see the Falcon approaching Yavin, and a shot of Leia standing on top of the temple, where we can also spot a rebel in a recon tower. And the Battle of Yavin will no doubt be the final story mission in this episode, before the story is wrapped up with the Yavin ceremony in the main outro cutscene, where we can see Chewie, Han, and Luke's ceremonial variant among several rebels. Moving on from the style guides, here we have some new concept art of Hoth's rebel base interior, where we can see 2 unknown minifigures on the right, and an Ectochi minifig standing behind the middle radar screen. We also got new concept art of the Battle of Naboo and the escape from Canto Bight, where police speeders pursue Rose Tico and the Fathiers. Next we get a great look at the Jedi Archive Room, where we can see Roman numerals for 3 and 4 on the ground, and in this next shot we can see a 6 with a sparkling statue of what I presume is a Jedi, and there's also an information bubble under a portrait of Mace Windu, so maybe the player can learn about Jedi lore in the archives. We can also see a portrait of what looks to be Count Dooku as a Jedi, which might be a reference to a deleted scene from episode 2, and while it would be amazing if this variant is playable, we saw in the gameplay overview trailer that there's only one unlockable version of Dooku, judging by the alphabetical order of the roster. But who knows, maybe Jedi Dooku is further down the roster in the J section. We'll have to wait and see. Here we get a new look at Kashyyyk with Yoda and Tarful watching Chewie slide down a rope, and I love that it sounds like he's doing the Tarzan yell in this clip. That was hilarious. And if you pause the trailer at the right second, you'll also be able to spot a Wookie fluttercraft at the very bottom of the screen. Now, here we learn that if a character puts on a stormtrooper helmet, their voice will change to sound like a trooper, which is an awesome detail. And the character that demonstrates this new feature is Leia, which is interesting because while Leia did wear a bush disguise in episode 6, she's never actually worn stormtrooper armor in the movies. But if you remember from the gameplay overview, I pointed out a stormtrooper torso floating above an orange disguise icon, orange being the color of the hero class, and we can see from the symbol below Leia that she is a hero class character. So this all leads me to believe that characters in this class may be able to fully disguise themselves, which is very exciting because in the original games the player could only disguise characters with a helmet, so being able to suit up in a full outfit is a huge upgrade for this classic feature. Next up we see Rey's Jedi training variant on Ahch-To, where we can also see the island's caretakers and even the visitors, who were actually cut from episode 8 and only appear in a deleted scene. So it's really cool to see TT Games adding cut content from the films to this game. And a big shout out to Henning A on Reddit for spotting the visitors. Amazing find. And before we move on, there also appears to be something hiding behind this rock, potentially a snake, but it doesn't look to be the same one that we see later in the dev diary. Here we see Obi-Wan and Anakin in Coruscant's Uskru district, where we can spot a hidden kyber brick in the top right corner, and 3 studs leading to a glowing door that could be for an interior, but judging by the design of the building, it doesn't appear to be for the Outlander Club. Next we get our best look yet at Maz's castle on Takodana, with Chewbacca and Han Solo. Hopefully we'll actually be able to go inside the castle as well, because that would be awesome. Here we see Obi-Wan using the Force to rebuild the Falcon, where we can also spot R2-D2, Luke, Han, C-3PO, and Chewie. So I believe this sequence and the clip where Han shoots at stormtroopers are gameplay of episode 4's Hunk of Junk story mission. Now here we see Anakin's starfighter in a random space encounter with a Trade Federation battleship. We can see that one side of the ship is on fire while the other has prompts of exclamation points around it, so the player likely has to shoot those areas until they catch fire. There's also a section of the ship that is highlighted red with a missile prompt over it, and I think this could be a weak point, so maybe if the player shoots a missile at it, they'll deal extra damage to the ship. We can also see from the HUD that Obi-Wan's episode 2 variant is piloting Anakin's starfighter, starfighter, and if you look in the bottom right corner, you can spot an icon for a Separatist captain, with a design that is inspired by the Nymodian battleship pilot Te-How, who appeared in Episode 1. Next up we see the Vexus Snake that Rey healed in Episode 9, and we know that the snake is native to Pasaana, so it'll be interesting to see if the team were just testing the model here, or if the player will actually be able to find the creature in the Jundland Wastes on Tatooine. This shot also gives us our first look at the open world map, where we can see icons for a character, a mission, a quest, and the D-pad. So I think if the player presses down on the D-pad, the game will bring up the holo projector, where you can access the galaxy map, characters, and much more. Next we see character art for the Rathtar creature from Episode 7, and an Orback from Episode 9, which is labelled as playable, and we've seen from one of the trailers that the player will be able to ride it. And another character model we see is for the Woolamander, a creature that is native to Yavin 4 but didn't appear in the movies and is typically found in the planet's forest environments, which is interesting because I was only expecting the temple and its surrounding area to be explorable, so Yavin 4 could be a little bigger than we're expecting, and I just love that the team is adding such deep cut content outside of the films. It's a testament to their passion for this franchise. Here we get another great look at Tatooine, where I spotted the 9000 Z001 Landspeeder, which appeared in Episode 4, but this vehicle just always seems to be sitting gathering dust in Mos Eisley, so it would be really cool if the player can actually hop inside and finally take it for a drive in this game. Now here's something weird that I found. If you pause the dev diary as Obi-Wan runs through the Gungan city, you can spot a hidden porg stuck to a web. So why is this sequel era creature in a prequel era environment? Well, I don't know, but I do have a theory. Maybe there are porgs hidden on each planet, and when the player finds them all, they'll unlock the porg companion extra. I think that would make sense, but we'll have to wait and see. This next shot gives us our first look at Jana's combat, and I've always enjoyed using archery characters in the LEGO games, but the bow and arrow in this one already looks so much more satisfying to use with the new over-the-shoulder camera. Next we see Darth Vader using the Force to grab and throw battle droids inside the Venator-class Star Destroyer interior, and I think this is gameplay of a story mission during free play, as we can see multiple capital ships in space and the chair that Palpatine was restrained to in Episode 3. Here we see Obi-Wan using the Force to grab and throw an object at stormtroopers, and at first I thought this was gameplay of the Hunk of Junk mission, but the environment looks a lot more open. I mean, I spotted 7 stormtroopers in this clip alone, so it would be amazing if the player can get into big battles like this with enemies whenever they want during free roam. Next up we see Yoda watching Luke try to use the Force to lift his X-Wing out of Dagobah's swamp, where we can also see a key collectible for a B-Wing. So I think there will be more keys like this on each planet for players to collect to unlock new vehicles. We can also spot an unknown NPC who needs assistance, and even a stormtrooper in the background. So it'll be interesting to see if the stormtrooper is quest related, or if there will be more enemies like this patrolling the planet during free roam. Now here we see the Rebel Alliance versus the Galactic Empire, and for those that don't know, the player can actually choose which side they want to help in these battles. We can see that after the TIE fighter explodes, the rebels fill more of the middle bar, so the goal is to continue taking out more enemy forces until your side fills the entire bar and wins the battle. And before we move on, I also wanted to point out that if you pause the dev diary at the right second, you'll also be able to spot what looks to be an A-Wing starfighter flying through space. Up next we see that Poe's jacket variant has flew his X-Wing into an encounter with the Steadfast, which is Supreme Leader Kylo Ren's personal Star Destroyer, and if you look in the bottom right corner, you can also spot an icon for Captain Swarton, who we'll come back to soon. Now, unlike the other random encounters that we've seen, this ship's name isn't listed above the health bar. Instead, it just says Ship Defenses. We can also see a green wireframe surrounding the ship, and there was actually a red wireframe around the damaged Trade Federation ship that we covered earlier. So maybe the wireframe turns red once the player has destroyed a ship's defenses. However, the green wireframe almost appears to be fading away in this clip, so it could just be a temporary visual, but we'll have to wait and see. Next we see Poe's X-Wing docking inside the Steadfast's interior landing bay, where we can also see 2 consoles that I would assume Player 1 and Player 2 can use to change their ships. Now here we see that the Seize the Steadfast encounter ends with a boss fight against the real Captain Swarton in an AT-ST, which is interesting because Swarton is actually a made-up character. She doesn't appear in any canon media, so I wonder if this captain and their name is randomly generated. And it'll be interesting to see if all capital ship encounters end with boss battles, so maybe we'll get to fight the Separatist captain and the TIE pilot one-on-one. And before we move on, I also wanted to point out that as Poe passes a box of thermal detonators, we can see that the player can actually choose to pick one up and throw it at the AT-ST during the battle. And of course, I can't not mention Pew Pew mode, an extra that will replace all weapon sound effects with phonetic mouth noises that simulate blasters, lightsabers, and more. Nothing new to point out in this shot, but I did want to use it to mention that Jonathan Smith, who is the head of production at TT Games, has confirmed that the single trooper aerial platform will be drivable. Next we see Poe's episode 9 variant flying his X-Wing in space, where we can see asteroids to avoid, a red question mark icon, and Tatooine's landing zones for the Jundland Wastes, Mos Espa, and I'd assume Mos Eisley. We can even see the Steadfast Star Destroyer in the distance, and I wonder if this is a capital ship that the player has won in a battle and can now freely explore, as the icon for it is blue just like the landing zones. And I also wanted to point out that if you pause the dev diary at the right second, you'll see that the HUD gives the player a preview of the landing zone that they hover over. In this case, it's the Jundland Wastes, which gives us a glimpse of the Lars homestead. Here we get our best look yet at Commander Cody in Utapau during a battle with battle droids and super battle droids in episode 3. And finally, one of the last shots that we see in the dev diary shows R2-D2 exploring Tatooine, where we can see some new NPCs, including an Aqualish, a Gran, and of course a Toydarian, aka Watto's species. Alright, so that's pretty much it for this video, so I want to thank you all very much for watching, and as always, if you'd like to stay up to date with the latest news on LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga, then please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe.